I'm not a conspiracy theorist because I feel like while it's fun or interesting, it's never productive, right? I'm like, we need solutions. But seeing everything that's happening within the US government, big tech, Gen Z, is starting to feel a little bit connected. And I just wanted to share my thoughts and my opinions about what's happening and what has happened over the past 2 weeks. It's only been 17 days, and I feel like we've lived 17 years in the last 2 weeks, and it's just the first month in the year. Like, I'm already exhausted. But when we see companies, especially tech companies, start to prioritize profit over people, cut corners when it comes to safety and ethical practices, change their core principles and commitments based on who's in power, we need to pay attention and we need to talk about it. And we need to talk about it now. Welcome to the Tech Unlock podcast, where we demystify emerging technologies and give you the keys to unlock your successful tech career. I'm your host, Grace McJones. Let's unlock the future together. Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 96 of the Tech Unlock podcast. There are so many tech stories happening, and I went down the rabbit hole, and I'm like, all this cannot be a coincidence. Whether it's Meta removing its fact checking team or the TikTok ban about to happen, supposedly, and you get why I said supposedly, to us seeing DEI being rolled back from big corporations like Walmart, McDonald's, and then we have the inauguration about to happen like in 30 minutes. And I'm like, oh, okay. We see what's going on. And it's interesting because in the past, things were hidden, right? Like certain CEOs would be seen with certain presidents where they would say certain things. And now everyone's like, y'all gonna find out. I'm gonna put it all on the table. And I'm like, okay, so if we're saying that companies are investing in how the governments are making certain laws and rules, where does that leave us, right? The average person. And if you work in tech, a lot of people are struggling with the morality of what's happening. And I'm not gonna lie, like I went down so many rabbit holes and I wouldn't say like I have all the answers. I'm left with more questions than answers. And I'm hoping that through this episode that we can talk about what's really going on and what might be solutions, because it's easy to have conspiracy theories, but like I said, I don't think they're very productive if we're not trying to get things done. And so there are four stories I want to talk about that I feel like are going to have an impact on a lot of people, whether you're a content creator, whether you're a tech worker, or someone that's concerned about free speech. You need to listen up and pay attention. The first story, I feel like a lot of people have talked about it, is Meta removing its fact checkers from its platform. So recently, Mark Zuckerberg said that they're moving to more of a community notes vibe because he didn't say this. That's what Donald Trump wants, probably because Elon and Trump are great business partners. I don't know what the right term to say, what kind of alliance that they have. But with everything coming out of Meta in the last few weeks, it sounds like there was a deal on the table and say like, hey, if you want to come over to the bro side of whatever within the Trump administration when it comes to big tech, these are the changes that you have to implement. And we've seen them make a lot of changes. And I'm like, okay, I don't think this change is for the better, but that's just my opinion. But what is very interesting to see and to note is that it's not fooling anyone, right? People on the left and people on the right, they're like, if someone else had won the election, nothing would have changed, right? If the Democrats had won, I don't think we would have seen all these changes. And so people feel like this is kind of not wishy-washy, but it's like this was predictable, right? That you would want to bow down to the person that's in power. But I'm like, do that in private. Like a lot of things that has happened, whether that's, Zuck going on Joe Rogan podcast or adding Dana White, who is the CEO of UFC, into Meta's board of directors. And I'm like, oh, okay. We get the message. We get it. We see where your stance is. And it's troubling because now we see that freedom of speech is not free. It has a cost. And if you have the right amount of connections and the right amount of money, then you are able to buy certain things within the government, right? Allegedly. And so it's a race for concern, right? I don't think any tech company is innocent, right? Meta has been in hot water so many times for different things. And now that I believe they have a case, well, with FTC coming up, I think in springtime. It's just interesting to see all the ploys that's being made to try to salvage that situation. And outside of that topic, we see that they're cutting 3,600 jobs, which is roughly 5% of the company. And they're labeling it as low performance. I'm not surprised about the layoff happening because I mentioned 2 episodes ago, I made a prediction about things are going to happen within tech in 2025. And some of it is happening right now, way sooner than expected. But I'm like, yeah, like it's expected. But what I did not expect to see is them labeling 3,600 people low performance. Obviously, I was like, this is not right in a sense. And I went to LinkedIn and people had the same sentiment of like, it's one thing to, terminate workers or to let them go, but it's one thing to have this blanket label on everybody, right? Because we know that not everyone has a perfect relationship with their leadership team or their manager. And sometimes people are vindictive and they might label you something that you're not. And I'm not saying that there are not people in tech right now who are coasting and not doing anything and not performing well. We have those people, trust me. Like I've been in tech for almost 7 years and I can tell you there are those people who are just coasting by doing the bare minimum. But to have that public blanket statement can very well damage some people's careers in terms of like them trying to find a job, especially in this current job tech climate where it's literally impossible to get a job, literally. And I just felt like there should have been a better way of saying this because I feel like now this is going to be a trend of companies coming out and saying, yeah, we're doing layoffs and, terminating whatever their low performance. And so people are like, oh, well, their low performance, they deserved it. And let's be for real, like that's not the best way to do it. People are already suffering a lot through everything that's happened in the last few years. The last thing they need is to have that on their back and on their resume. And so I'm just like, that was not needed. And I hope that that's not a trend that we see within tech. But only time will tell if that's something that happens. Another news with Meta is that with obviously trends of layoff, we're also seeing the talks about the TikTok ban. And I'm like, are these two things related? I don't know. It might be related because, first of all, apparently the current TikTok CEO, who's Singaporean, I'm from Singapore, interned at Meta or Facebook back then, and might have pitched the idea of an algorithm or maybe TikTok, kind of something like that on Instagram. And I'm like, I don't know if all that is true. And to see now in 2025 this kind of shift and hate toward TikTok is it's not a coincidence because we know there's a lot of powerful people within big tech and there's a lot of lobbying in Washington for a lot of these companies to remain in power and to have dominance in certain markets. And so TikTok is a threat to a lot of tech companies, right? Let's run down the list, whether that's a threat to Amazon because of TikTok Shop and it comes to competition with Amazon Prime and just anything on Amazon or ads, right? Whether that's Google ads or even when it comes to Instagram Reels. A lot of people prefer the algorithm on TikTok versus Instagram Reels. Just feel like it connects them with people that have the same interests, right? And so now to see, all the shift that's happening with a lot of people wanting to get rid of TikTok. And let me just be frank and to be honest, I do believe some of the concerns the government have is legit because TikTok is not owned by the US. They probably have information and insight to some of the data collection that, TikTok has or ByteDance, the parent company, has collected over the few years. And that could be a threat. But there are other things that are a huge threat to Americans every day that the government hasn't addressed. And I'm like, when are you guys going to focus on that? Whether it's, helping people have affordable health care or increasing the minimum wage. There's just so many other things threatening Americans from a day-to-day perspective than just TikTok. And I'm like, why this? Why now? And when it comes to this ban, it's interesting to see that it's not like left versus right. Like we're not seeing that kind of debate. We're seeing it being the people versus the government, right? And it is important to know, though, that this all started because of one person and one person alone. And we know who that is because they're about to become president again. And this whole idea of a TikTok ban was introduced by President Trump in August of 2020. And to look at it now 5 years later, and people are like, oh yeah, TikTok's gonna get banned because, the Senate passed it, the House passed it, and then obviously the Supreme Court decided to uphold the ban. And I just don't think it's going to get banned. That's my opinion. I don't think it's going to get banned. Let me explain. Let me explain. It might go dark for a while, obviously, because I feel like they're going to try and respect what the Supreme Court and everyone have said. But there's just so much clout on the table that I feel like some rich white guys like, nah, I have to save it. Like, if it's not Trump, it might be Elon. God, I hope not. Or it might be Mr. Beast or Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank or Mark McCourt, which I believe he's been trying to buy it for a while through the Liberty Project, which I recently read more about. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. Basically, a lot of billionaires are interested, right, in this. And the more I looked into it, I'm like, okay, if TikTok is gone, it's going to be great for a lot of tech companies, right? Because it's like, oh, finally the competition is gone and we can eat more of that market. At the same time, TikTok is a very profitable business. The company itself, I believe, it's worth $100 billion. And so there's a lot of money to be lost and a lot of money to be gained. I honestly feel like Trump might come in, try to save the day so that Gen Zers will be indebted to him and say, thank you for saving our favorite app. And then sell it to one of his rich buddies. And it's not really going to be the same app. Because if you think about it, one of the conditions that was listed in that ban was that it has to detangle any form of Chinese technology, meaning that ByteDance can actually sell the algorithm to the new owner, which I don't know. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. So what are you buying? Are you buying the name or the brand? And I'm just kind of like, okay, if the document clearly states that you have to remove any sort of connection to the technology that was built in, China within TikTok, then what is going to happen? So it's going to be a hot mess, but I think that TikTok, yes, might go dark, but I think that someone's going to try and save it to be the hero. And then people are going to be like, okay, great. But the damage is done, to be honest. I feel like a lot of people, 170 million users, are like, you know what, we don't trust the government. Like, this doesn't sound right. And, you have 7 million small businesses who have done so much in terms of like revenue because they finally have a platform to sell their products, but also grow community. And then you have the 7,000 US TikTok workers that no one is talking about. I don't know why this story isn't really blowing up in a sense, because if the US government really cares about its people, what are they doing to make sure that the 7,000 people who might be potentially be laid off or not have a job due to the ban, how are they making sure that they are, somehow I wouldn't say compensated, but make sure that they have a job or make sure that the ban doesn't affect their livelihood. I don't know. Like at that part, I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. And then I started reading some threads and some tweets, I would say. And someone who recently worked at TikTok, he left, was saying that some people who work at TikTok are already interviewing at Meta. And I was like, oh, okay, this kind of makes sense. Where at first people had mentioned that people who worked at Meta actually left in the beginning to go work at TikTok. And now that, it's looking like it might be over for TikTok, a lot of people are going back to Meta. Because if you think about it, the only competition for TikTok in the US, like the biggest competition, is Instagram Reels. Like that's it. Obviously YouTube Shorts exists, but it's not the same algorithm, it's not the same community, and it's much harder to grow on YouTube than any other platform. Seeing that a lot of people are not even moving to Instagram Reels because they just don't trust meta-based platforms, and making the move to RedNote. If you haven't heard about RedNote, This is not funny. I'm sorry. This is not funny, but it's just so interesting. RedNote is a Chinese based owned company that's kind of like TikTok. When I dug into it, RedNote was it's kind of like Pinterest and Instagram, but with also vertical videos. And people feel like, okay, like I feel like this is kind of the replacement. And I'm like, y'all don't understand that they try to ban TikTok because it's owned by a Chinese based company. Now you're going directly to a Chinese based owned app and creating content and posting all that kind of stuff. I get the frustration, but I'm like, the math isn't mathing, y'all. Like, if they're able to ban TikTok, they're likely going to ban this app, to be honest. Like, let's be for real. But I know that people feel like they want a place to go and they're like, let's take it to the government and just go straight to a Chinese based app and give all our info voluntarily. Voluntarily sign up, read the terms and conditions, which is in Mandarin. And a lot of people don't know what they're reading, don't know what they're signing. But then again, even in the US, a lot of people sign up to a lot of apps and they don't know what they're reading and they just sign in and use the platform. I feel like people are like tired and so they're like whatever, we're going to do whatever we want, but I think you should be more careful. I'm not on the red note app, and I think it's called jiahongshu in Chinese or in Mandarin, and it's problematic because I'm not gonna lie, like it's kind of scary how desperate people are to find a familiar place. And I get it, but I don't think that's a long-term solution, and so I think you should be aware of the apps that you try to run to in this moment where people are looking for what to do and in this area of uncertainty. But I don't think I'm sorry, I don't think Red Note is the answer. I've seen some of the videos people are posting and some people are amused.
50,000 new Chanel shopping spree, and every time I pop out, you know I ATE. I'm that bitch.
Some people are amused and some people are like, yeah, nah, that's not for me. But whatever happens with the TikTok ban, the damage is already done. And I feel like a lot of people have a lot of distrust already with the government. And even if Trump does save TikTok, I don't think Gen Z are foolish. I don't think they're stupid. They can read the room. They see what is happening. And so I don't think people are going to be like, oh, thank you for saving TikTok. We're going to be now like supporters of the new administration. If anything, they're like, wow, it looks like you played us the whole time. And looking at all of this is something I also found out. The real winner in all this craziness, I won't say winner because that's kind of an exaggeration, but someone who has benefit from this, it's Duolingo, like the Duolingo, the bird app, which I'm low key obsessed with. I have like 1,000 something streak on there, learning multiple languages, but they've seen a huge spike in US users learning Mandarin. And I'm like, huh, I kind of love this cultural exchange, learning something different, but it's only a matter of time. I don't think it's going to last. Now, the last headline that a lot of people are talking about, and I mentioned it, when I talked about predictions for 2025, is the rollback in DEI practices and initiatives. Meta also is getting rid of their DEI team and practices when it comes to hiring. Walmart, McDonald's, and other corporate companies are doing the same thing. I'm not surprised. Like, we have a new regime in town, and it's not surprising that people want to adhere to what might please that new administration. But one thing that pissed me off, literally pissed me off, is that a lot of people were blaming the LA fires recently because of DEI. And I'm like, are you for real? Like, right now, like, people are dying, losing their homes, going through tremendous loss, and you want to play DEI? Like, really? And if, I'm just like, you know what? I'm this close to saying, let's get rid of DEI. Let's get rid of it because the way people are overusing that term is outrageous. It's crazy to me. And to be honest, in the past, DEI has been weaponized several times, but to see that come up with everything else that's happening, I'm like, wow, like you all are really out there, like trying to make sure that, the real focus of what should be focusing on, which are the people who are going through this loss and going through so much pain. Like they're making sure they're getting any assistance that they need and putting this stupid claim. It's just so crazy to me and very, very, very disheartening to see. And one of the things that I hope moving forward within tech is that maybe we restructure what DEI means, to be honest. Because if people feel like it's broken as a terminology, okay, let's scrap it. Let's say something else that helps empower other people and marginalized voices. And so the three biggest lessons that you need to understand or you need to take away from this conversation is number one, if you work for a company that is not based in the US, you need to start figuring out what your options might be in the future, because the government just showed that they can throw in, national security as a way of getting rid of a company or a business, and you could be gone in terms of your job or your livelihood. And this is more obviously correlated to people who work in tech. At this moment, anything can happen. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if anything happens. So if you work for a foreign company and you live in the US, just know that things might be changing and you to have a game plan if they do change for you. And then number two, when it comes to social media creation, you need to make sure that you have a direct way of talking to your audience. I think a lot of people are realizing that now, that just being on social media platforms are not necessarily safe, but it's not guaranteed that they will be here, right? Anything can happen and you are disconnected with your community, with people that follow you. So make sure that you create ways to own your own platforms or be able to communicate with your audience. So whether that's having your email list or having different form of communication with your community, whether that's maybe Patreon or I don't know. It's time for us to figure it out, because I feel like now is the time for social media to be disrupted. And also I think it's time for decentralization, right? I think when we talked about Web3 in the past, people were like, oh my gosh, like it's all, a scam and it's not going to work. Now we see the use cases. We really do need a decentralized platform. And I know that there's platforms like Blue Sky that exist. And I hope for us to see more, especially once it comes to video content. I think we need that. The third lesson, in all of this is diversify, diversify, diversify. I know some people don't like that word, but in this climate and in this, reality that we're in, that can save you. Diversify how you hear and receive news, diversify how and where you share your content, diversify your friend group so you can learn from other people outside the US of what's going on, right? I think sometimes we think the world revolves around the US, but when I talk to friends that don't live here, they're like, oh, we didn't know that. Oh, that's interesting. Or here are some other options to some of the problems you might be facing. And I think that's needed, right? Because I feel like it might feel doom and gloom and overwhelming that everything is going to go to, the frown and, it's just going to be the end of the world. I'm like, it's not the end of the world, and it might feel like that if you live in the US, but it's not. So I hope you're able to learn those things. Like I said in the beginning, so just my thoughts and my opinions. I am an optimist, and I feel like the more people are informed, they can make better decisions with where they spend their time, who they give their data to. And so I hope that whatever changes that happen in 2025 within tech, that people feel empowered to do things differently, right? They feel empowered to create the solutions and not just complain about the problems. And so let me know in the comment, are you for the TikTok ban? Do you think TikTok is actually going to get banned? And I'll catch you next time on the Tech Unlock podcast. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching.